So I'm going to move straight into the first session today, and our first speaker today is Eddie Darcy. Eddie Darcy is a youth worker and representing youth workers against Prohibition. So I'm going to go straight over to Eddie and we move straight into today's position. Thank you and welcome, Eddie.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, my name is Eddie Darcy. For the last 40 years, I've been working in marginalised communities as a frontline youth worker, and I represent a group of 200 frontline youth workers, most with over 25 years' experience in the Greater Dublin area. I spent 30 years from the mid-1980s in Neilstown in West Dublin, and obviously during that time we were hit with the heroin epidemic, and one of the responses to that was I set up an organisation called CASP, which today continues to provide the whole range of services to young people, adults and their families in that community who are struggling with addiction. I moved then to work to set up Sulla's project in the southwest inner city, where I spent 10 years as the CEO, just retiring last year. So in relation to our own proposal, as far as we're concerned, you know, the drug war has been going on for the last 25 years, and we're getting absolutely really nowhere with it. So the situation at the moment is that drugs are more available in Ireland than ever before. More people use drugs, illegal drugs in Ireland than ever before. And what we're looking at is the power and the control that gangs have in many communities has now spread beyond the marginalised communities in Dublin and is now really countrywide. What we're looking at again would be, you know, the level of profit that is made by the illegal drug gangs is so high that no sooner is one gang broken up than another gang replaces them immediately. As soon as a dealer is cleared off the street, generally our experience is within half an hour another dealer takes their place. So this war is impossible to win the way it's been fought at the moment. It has never been won in any other country in the world. So we're looking for a radical change in terms of how we're trying to fight this war on drugs. Drug gangs, they have no conscience when it comes to selling their products to children under 18. They have no conscience when it comes to toxicity of their product. They continue to recruit young people. Many young people in the community I work in at the moment, the southwest inner city, young people from the age of 10, 11 and 12 are gradually being sucked into those organisations to work for them on the basis that the chance to make big money, fear, intimidation, debt, all the reasons why people get sucked into these gangs. They continue to intimidate both individuals, families and communities, and intimidate them through severe intimidation, which includes a high level of violence. There's been reports recently of a drug gang in Wexford whose favourite operandus is chopping off the fingers of people who owe them money. So your debt never disappears. If you owe money and you decide to do a runner to England, the debt passes on to your parents or your brother or your wife or some other member of the family. That debt will be collected. If you can't raise the money to pay it, you will be sucked into becoming part of the operation. You will be used to ferry drugs, to carry drugs, to sell drugs, or in extreme cases, maybe to eliminate a rival drug gang member. So for us, you know, we have created this monster in these communities, and we really need to do something about that, you know. Look, as frontline youth workers, we recognise the harm and damage that drugs do to individuals and their families and the communities. So we're not saying in any way that these drugs don't harm people. We recognise the harm they do. We see it every single day of our working lives. We're working with young people whose lives are affected directly by drugs. We're working with families whose lives are affected directly by drugs. So we're not saying drugs don't do any harm. We recognise they do harm. However, we also recognise that the present approach by government creates even more difficulties, because we have communities and families living in terrible fear. And I mean, we don't really have a response to that. So if somebody calls into our youth centre or calls in to see one of our staff on a Friday afternoon at 4:30 and says, you know, two lads called to my door, my son's run up a debt of €3,000 and they're going to be back at 6 o'clock looking for money, or they're going to put through my front door and they're going to batter the crap out of my son and they're going to keep doing it till we raise the money. We don't really have an answer to that. Maybe people who haven't experienced themselves, or maybe people who don't live in communities where the violence is often very, very obvious and very public, don't understand how difficult it is. People in that situation can't and won't and don't approach the guards. because they know the repercussions are going to be much more serious. Their house could be petrol bombed. Their windows will be put in. Their son will be beaten up. And if they can't get him, they'll get somebody else. I spoke at a conference down in Limerick, where CASP also runs programmes, and I met a woman from a small village of Ennistimon. And she told me about her experience of having to wait at the seafront in Lahinch to hand over a large envelope full of money. She said, I never thought ever in my life I'd have any connection with any criminal activity. And here I am, never been in trouble in my life, meeting these two young men and handing over a brown envelope. That goes on every day of the week, all the way around this country. The other outcome of the criminal...
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, very, very quickly. The other thing I am concerned about is the number of young men we have criminalised. So we went from a prison population of 750 adults in prison in 1975 to almost 4,000 people in prison today. 90% of those young men are in prison because of the criminalisation of drugs. They may be serving a sentence of 18 months or 2 years or 3 years. However, it's a life sentence because it's very difficult to get a mortgage, quite difficult to get a job. You can't even be involved in community activity if you have on your record the fact that you're involved in the drug trade. So that's a life sentence for those young men. So I'm going to appeal to you today to consider a really, really bold move and regulate the sale of the illegal drugs. Get it out of the hands of the illegal gangs. I'm going to ask you to be brave. In fact, I'm going to plead with you to be brave and to think about a really bold step. Let's get rid of that monster that we've created. Okay? We accept the fact that considerable numbers of people use drugs. They are always going to use drugs. But what I'm asking you to do is consider a really bold move, and let's take the trade out of the hands of the drug gangs, because we are never going to defeat them the way we're doing at the moment. If we don't take a brave move now, in 25 years, we are going to be back here talking about the same problem. Okay? So please consider what I've said today. Think about those families and communities that are being influenced by the drug gangs and consider a really, really bold move. All right? Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Eddie.